With the unprecedented spread of this truly unprecedented virus, it is important that everyone be prepared for the next influenza pandemic. So let me just throw out some resources. The CDC has set up an excellent pandemic preparedness website, pandemicflu.gov. If you click across here, you will find pandemic preparedness checklists for businesses, schools, communities, faith-based groups, all the way down to individual and family preparation, which really focuses on getting everyone right now to stockpile weeks of essential supplies to shelter in place during a pandemic, isolating ourselves and our families in our homes until the danger passes. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security is now using as a key planning assumption that the U.S. population may be directed to remain in their homes under self-quarantine for up to 90 days per wave of the pandemic to support social distancing. Kind of like a snow emergency where you're just told to stay inside, don't go out unless it's an emergency. But instead of lasting a day or two, lasts weeks or even months. Everyone ready to stay in their homes for 3 months? If we have to go out to the corner store during a pandemic to buy toilet paper or something, we may be bringing back to our family more than just groceries. Where did this virus come from in the first place? And of course, AIDS is not our only new disease. There's SARS, Ebola, mad cow, bird flu. But from where do emerging diseases emerge? Human beings have been on this earth for millions of years, yet throughout most of human evolution, there were no epidemic diseases. No one ever got the measles because measles didn't exist. No one got smallpox, no one got the flu, not even the common cold, until about here, 10,000 years ago. Medical anthropologists have identified 3 major periods of disease since the beginning of human evolution, and the first started just 10,000 years ago with the domestication of animals. When we brought animals into the barnyard, they brought their diseases with them. When we domesticated cows and sheep, for example, we also domesticated their rinderpest virus, which turned into human measles, now thought of as a relatively benign disease. Over the last 150 years, measles has killed 200 million people. And in a sense, all those deaths can ultimately be traced back just a few hundred generations to the taming of the first cattle. Smallpox likely came from camel pox. We domesticated pigs and got whooping cough. We domesticated chickens. And we got typhoid fever and typhoid Mary, and domesticated ducks and got influenza. Before the domestication of ducks, likely no one ever got the flu. Leprosy likely came from water buffalo, and the common cold from horses. How often did wild horses have the opportunity to sneeze into humanity's collective face until they were broken and bridled? We may soon be facing, according to the U.S. Institute of Medicine, what they call a catastrophic storm of microbial threats. We are now smack dab in the 3rd era of human disease, which seems to only started about 30 years ago. Medical historians have called this time in which we live the age of emerging plagues, almost all of which come from animals. We are changing the way animals live. Wildlife has been hunted for thousands of years, yes, but never before like this. With the demand for wildlife meat outstripping local supplies, what countries have done is set up these intensive captive production farms, cramming wild animals in these cramped, filthy cages and then smuggling them around the world. This intensive commercial bushmeat trade actually started in the live markets of Asia, particularly the Guangdong province, a southern province surrounding Hong Kong, from which the current bird flu threat arose. So we are changing the way animals live, contributing to the emergence of these new diseases. But there's one way we have changed our relationship with animals that really outshadows all the rest. In response to this torrent of emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases, the world's 3 leading authorities got together for a joint consultation. The World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization in the United Nations, and the World Organization for Animal Health, the world's leading veterinary authority, got together to uncover the key underlying causes of this age of emerging plagues. They came up with four main themes of risk factors for the emergence and spread of these new diseases. Yes, they talked about the exotic pet trade, they talked about bushmeat, but number one on their list was this increasing demand for animal protein the world over. Yes, we domesticated animals 10,000 years ago, but never before like this, especially pigs and poultry. Chickens used to peck around the barnyard, but now chickens raised for meat are typically warehoused in sheds containing tens of thousands of birds. About half of the egg-laying hens on this planet are now confined in what are called battery cages. These small barren wire enclosures extending down long rows and windowless sheds can be up to 1 million birds on a single farm. About half of the pigs on the planet are now, again, crowded into these intensive confinement operations. Old McDonald's farm has since been replaced by the new McDonald's farm. These intensive systems represent the most profound alteration of the human-animal relationship in 10,000 years. And no surprise, they are breeding grounds for disease. We took natural herbivores like cows and sheep, turned them into carnivores and cannibals by feeding them slaughterhouse waste, blood, and manure. And then we took downed animals, too sick to even walk, fed them to people, and now we have mad cow disease. We feed antibiotics to farm animals by the truckload. This is the total amount of antimicrobials used for all of human medicine every year. Now contrast that with the amount we feed to farm animals just to promote growth or prevent disease in such a stressful, unhygienic environment. Millions of pounds a year. And now we have these multi-drug resistant bacteria, and we as physicians are running out of good antibiotic options. Let me put these new animal disease threats in perspective. SARS infected thousands of human beings, killed hundreds. Nipah infected hundreds, killed scores. Strep suis infected scores, killed dozens. Now, AIDS has infected millions, but there's only one virus on the planet that can rapidly infect billions, and that's influenza. Influenza, the so-called last great plague of humankind, is the only known pathogen capable of truly global catastrophe these days. Unlike many other important diseases like malaria, which are largely confined at the equator, or a virus like HIV, which is only fluid-borne, the influenza virus is considered the only pathogen capable of literally infecting half of humanity within a matter of months. Now, in the 4,500 years that we as a species have had influenza, since the first domestication of birds, influenza has always been one of our most contagious known diseases. But only since the emergence of this highly pathogenic, highly disease-causing strain H5N1 has the influenza virus also emerged as one of our deadliest. H5N1, spreading out of Asia 2004, 2005, 2006, and continuing to this day, has only killed about a few hundred people. Not to minimize, each death is a terrible tragedy. But in a world in which millions of people continue to die of diseases like AIDS, tuberculosis, why is there so much concern about the so-called bird flu? Because it's happened before. Because the last time a bird flu virus adapted to human beings, it triggered the worst plague in human history, the influenza pandemic of 1918. Modern flu strains tend to spare young, healthy adults, but the 1918 virus killed people in the prime of life. In 1918, a quarter of all Americans fell ill. In poultry, bird flu has gone from an exceedingly rare disease to one which now pops up every year. The number of outbreaks of highly pathogenic avian influenza in the first few years of this century have already exceeded the total number of outbreaks recorded for the entire 20th century. You'll note that these are 5-year intervals. Well, in just the first 5 months of 2006, we were already up to here, with outbreaks continuing to this day. If one looks at the number of birds involved, the escalation is even more dramatic. At this scale, not even a blip until the 1980s. Bird flu seems to be undergoing evolution in fast forward, and the increase in chicken outbreaks has gone hand in hand with increased transmission to humans. A little over 10 years ago, essentially no known people, not a single person known to get sick directly from bird flu, but since H5N1 arose in 1997, 4 other chicken flu viruses have affected people from Hong Kong to New York City. And people have been keeping chickens in the backyards for thousands of years, and birds have been migrating for millions. Bird flu's been around forever. What turned bird flu into a killer? Well, the senior correspondent, NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, posed that question to Dr. Webster, the so-called godfather of flu research. Was there something qualitatively different about this last decade made it possible for this disease to do something it's never done before, some kind of change in conditions that suddenly lit a match to the tinder? Webster replied. He said, farming practices have changed. He talks about growing up on a farm. But now, we put millions of chickens into a chicken factory, next door to a pig factory. And this virus has the opportunity to get in one of these chicken factories and make billions and billions of these mutations continuously. And so what we've changed is the way we raise animals and our interaction with those animals. Then he talks about how the virus is escaping from the factories, infecting wild birds. But he says that's what's changed. We've changed the way we raise animals. Right? But we're changed the way we raise animals by the billions. The number of chickens we slaughter every day, spread wing to wing, would wrap more than twice around the world's equator. The big shift in the ecology of avian influenza has been the intensification of the global poultry sector. The developing world meat and egg consumption has exploded, leading to these industrial-scale commercial chicken facilities, arguably the perfect storm environment for the emergence and spread of these so-called superstrains of influenza. In the early 1980s, nearly all the chickens in China were raised in tiny backyard outdoor flocks. But now there are 63,000 CAFOs in China, concentrated animal feeding operations, with a few of these so-called factory farms confining 10 million birds on a single farm. The World Health Organization blames the emergence of H5N1, SARS, Nipah virus, all these new deadly emerging Asian viruses, in part what they call the overconsumption of animal products in this intensive animal agriculture. Then there may be no stopping rapidly mutating viruses from becoming truly ferocious. And this may explain the virus of 1918, rising out of the trenches of World War I. There were these crowded troop transports. Boxcars were labeled 8 horses or 40 men. So when this harmless virus found itself in these kind of conditions, it turned deadly. Millions forced together under cramped quarters, no escaping a sick comrade. This is thought to be where the virus of 1918 gained its virulence. From the virus's point of view, though, these same trench warfare conditions exist today in every industrial chicken shed, every industrial egg operation, confined, crowded, stressed, but by the billions, not just millions. Starts out harmless, turns deadly. That's what these conditions may be able to do. This is not, arguably, how animals were meant to live. Transition from harmless to deadly always seems to happen in these kind of conditions because of the overcrowding. Remember, transmission from immobilized hosts. Because of the sheer numbers, because of the inadequate ventilation, the dankness helps keep the virus alive. Because of the stress crippling their immune systems, because of the filth. The virus is in the feces that they're lying in, which are decomposing, releasing ammonia, burning their respiratory tracts, predisposing them to respiratory infection in the first place, and because there may be no sunlight. The UV rays in sunlight are actually quite effective in destroying the influenza virus. 30 minutes of direct sunlight completely inactivates H5N1, but it can last for days in the shade and weeks in moist manure. So you put all these factors together, and what you have is this kind of perfect storm environment for the emergence and spread of new superstrains of influenza. Even if the industry had perfect compliance with these guidelines. Even if everyone going in and out stepped in antiseptic foot baths, scrubbed their boots, washed their hands, even with perfect compliance, it likely would not be enough. We now know that H5N1 can be carried by flies. Right? You cannot keep flies out of a poultry shed. See, H5N1 is a biosafety level 3+ pathogen. That means in a laboratory setting, this virus must only be handled in unique high-containment buildings, specially engineered with airlocks, double-door access, shower in, shower out, all floors, walls, ceilings sealed, waterproofed, all electric outlets, phone cords cocked, collared, sealed to prevent any air leaks. All surfaces decontaminated daily, all solid waste incinerated. That's how you're supposed to handle this virus. That's biosecurity. In contrast to this, the global industrial poultry industry seems to be breeding viruses like H5N1 at essentially biosafety level 0. It is curious that changing the way humans treat animals, most basically ceasing to eat them, or at the very least radically limiting the quantity of them that is eaten, is largely off the radar as a significant preventive measure. Such a change, if sufficiently adopted or enforced, however, even at this late stage, could still reduce the likelihood of the much-feared influenza pandemic. It would even more likely prevent unknown future diseases that, in the absence of the change, may result from farming animals intensively and killing them for food. Yet, humanity does not even seem to consider this option. We don't tend to shore up the levees until after the disaster. Hopefully, it won't take a pandemic before we take these recommendations into account. The editorial concludes, those who consume animals not only harm those animals and endanger themselves, but they also threaten the well-being of future generations on this planet. To switch avian images, it is time for humans to remove their heads from the sand and recognize the risk to themselves that can arise from their maltreatment of other species. How we treat animals can have global public health implications. Hopefully, the direction world history will take is away from raising birds by the billions under intensive confinement, so as to potentially lower our risk of us ever being in this precarious place ever again. The entire contents of the book is now available free, full text online at birdflubook.org. The goal is to be prepared, not scared. The bottom line is that humans have to think about how they treat their animals, how they farm them, how they market them. Basically, the whole relationship between the animal kingdom and the human kingdom is coming under stress. In this age of emerging plagues, we now have billions of feathered and curly-tailed test tubes for viruses to incubate and mutate within, billions more spins at pandemic roulette. Along with human culpability, though, comes hope. If changes in human behavior can cause new plagues, well then changes in human behavior may prevent them in the future.